Miriam Putman
has joined the meeting.
Well, good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock, and I want to be punctual as we start this. I'd like to welcome you all to the TRI reporting tool tutorial. As many of you know, this reporting tool has been in existence for quite some time. Unfortunately, it has not been updated in quite some time. I think the last time this tool was updated was back in 2007. So, considering the fact that the federal government does not fall back on its regulations, but actually increases them on a yearly basis, we decided that it was high time for us to take a look at this tool and update it according to the reporting requirements as we best know them that are out there right now. So that this tool attempts to bring us up to date as far as those substances that we typically find at our facilities that require us to report under the TRI reporting program. We reached out to
Enviro Ag Engineering
has joined the meeting.
We reached out to Woodruff and Howe about a half a year ago, maybe a little bit more, and asked them to take a look at this and help us with this update. And recognizing that there was a substantial change in the way the form looked and the chemicals that were listed on
has joined the meeting.
We decided to set this tutorial up and ask Woodruff and Howe to walk us through this during this tutorial, through this web-based tutorial. For those of you that know, and for those of you that don't know, there are actually two forms in existence. One form covers TRI reporting at a plant, and the second form that we have available to you all covers TRI reporting for feed mills that are out there. Clearly, we will make this tool, these Excel spreadsheets available to you. We noticed here today that there are some minor changes that need to take place. So while we have them, I believe, posted on our website at this point in time, we will update those slightly and we will make them available. So I would ask that you don't download those forms for the next 24 hours, let's just say. I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over
again. Has joined the meeting.
We've got this set up to run through the form. Excuse me. You'll see on the screen
has joined the meeting
that we have posted directions as far as asking questions. It is our intent today to respond to questions that you may have. So you'll see on your screen there that we've got instructions for asking those questions. There's two ways that you can do it. One way is raising your hand. So if you have connected to the web conference through a phone call or your
has joined the meeting,
you can raise your hand, and when we come to a stopping point, we will work through those individuals that raise their hand. We will unmute each individual one at a time. We'll give that individual an opportunity to ask that question, and then we've got two individuals from Woodruff and Howe, Mr. Trent Samples and Mr. Stephen Woodruff, available to answer those questions. The second way is to type a question down at the bottom. You'll see on your screen there that there's a
has joined the meeting
that will allow you to type your question in. So I think our intent at this point in time is we'll start with those individuals that have raised their hand and would like to answer a question, ask a question verbally. We'll respond to those, and then we'll move on to those individuals that have typed in questions, and we'll do our best to answer each one of them. We are recording this web conference, and we will post this web conference on our website, or provide you a link at least, that will allow you in the future to return to this web conference and view it at your leisure, or pass that link on to people that maybe could not participate today. So with that, I think we've covered everything, and at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and turn control of the web conference over to Trent Sample, who is going to start with, I'm not sure which one he's going to start with, but he's going to start with the first form. So Trent, take it away.
All right, thank you, Paul. Yes, Trent Samples and Stephen Woodruff are here, and our goal is to kind of show you the guidance tool, or it's an Excel spreadsheet, so I may use the terms tool or spreadsheet kind of interchangeably, but I'm referring to the same thing. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, it had been well over 10 years since the prior versions of the tool or the spreadsheet had been modified. So it was definitely due for an update. We wanted to try to make the tool more user-friendly. We wanted to provide better documentation of calculations. This version of the tool is not as transparent as the old versions, meaning that hopefully when you input data, you can kind of determine how the calculation is being made. It's not kind of hidden from you, so that way you can hopefully better understand what's going on. As well as there's just been a lot of chemical use changes in the industry.
Has joined the meeting.
As far as, with food safety and sanitation chemical use changes, there's just some, of course, the greatest example of that is paracetic acid. 10, 12 years ago, folks weren't using paracetic acid like they are now. So it's just definitely due for an update. So here in just a few moments, I'm going to be showing you the tool and kind of working through an example on how you use it and what the data that you get from it. So just as Paul mentioned, there are two versions of the tool. One is for kind of a typical poultry processing plant, and as well as there's a tool for poultry feed mills. I do want to mention that there are limitations to this tool's use. It's not intended for rendering facilities, and unfortunately it's not intended for hydrogen sulfide reporting. I know there's just a lot of, when it comes to reporting hydrogen sulfide, there's just a lot of site-specific variables that are in play, and it was just really hard to make kind of a one-size-fits-all tool to use for hydrogen sulfide. But I do want to point out, as many of you probably already know, U.S. Poultry and Egg there is a document called the TRI Reporting Guidance for Poultry Processing for Hydrogen Sulfide that kind of gives you some guidance for how to do hydrogen sulfide reporting.
Has joined the meeting.
Also,
Has joined the
this tool
meeting.
is not set up to calculate releases of chlorine dioxide or polycyclic aromatic compounds or PACs, as well as some other things listed here like lead and mercury. PACs are primarily as a result of fuel combustion, like fuel oil combustion. Certainly compared to 10 or 15 years ago, there's just across the industry, there's just a lot less fuel oil being combusted. And certainly there's not a lot of folks busting like heavier residual fuel oil, so we just didn't feel the need to include PACs in this tool. So let me show you guys what the tool looks like. So I'll start with the one for the poultry processing plants. As you can see, like the first tab is a cover sheet, which is just kind of for your record keeping. When you go through the tool and you input data, and when you're completely finished, this is just kind of something for your records to kind of have a cover for it. There's an instructions worksheet or work instructions tab. Obviously, it's very important that you read this. I'm not going to spend much time on this today, but it just kind of reiterates, again, what's the scope of the tool, the chemicals that it's intended for, the chemicals that it's not intended for, just kind of issues some cautions and kind of how to use this spreadsheet. As you'll see here in just a moment, the tool's set up to where cells that are shaded light blue are data input cells. And so obviously you'll only be modifying tools that are shaded light blue. Also, this tool kind of assumes that the user has somewhat of a working knowledge of TRI, maybe has done some TRI reporting in the past. But if you are an amateur, we list on the bottom of the instruction page some additional guidance documents that you should consult for additional information. So I think the best way to kind of to show this tool is here in just a few moments, I'm going to give an example, but I just want to kind of quickly cover, there's an instructions tab that shows how to use it. As you'll see in a moment, general rules of thumb or some guidance are indicated throughout this tool in italics. So if you see something in italics, it means it's important, as well as kind of the background calculations are generally in brackets. So again, if you see something in italics, it's kind of like instructions, or it's real important that you pay attention to it. And if you see something in brackets, that's kind of like it's kind of showing how that cell is computing what it's computing. There's another tab called the Additional Reporting Guidance. This is just, I know a lot of folks have questions on how to complete the Form Rs, and this tool is really meant to just kind of determine your reporting applicability, to kind of help you with those threshold calculations. Okay, did I exceed the threshold? Do I need to report? But as you know, that's just kind of one part of it. Once you do have to report, you've got to go complete a Form R, or some instances a Form A. But this is just kind of help you kind of give some helpful hints and tips and some information on how to complete the Form Rs. So I'm not going to go through it, but once you have the tool, you can read through and see that. Now, the bulk of this tool is set up to where basically all the information all the data that you have, or all the data that you'll need for TRI reporting, you can input it on this one worksheet. And then, so basically, just to kind of know the way this is set up, you would input all your information on this worksheet that you see here, and then all these other tabs are just supporting calculations. There's a summary tab, and of course there's a tab for each chemical that this tool's for, like for ammonia, for nitrate, for peracetic acid, methanol, and so forth. So let me back up, and I just want to give an example. And I think once I kind of go through an example, I think it'll be more clear to you, and then of course we'll pause to take some questions. So let's just say we have an example poultry plant. Now in my example, this is the primary wastewater treatment of this plant consists of DAF pretreatment followed by a sequence batch reactor followed by land application. So in my example, all the wastewater effluent is land applied. So I've just, like Paul mentioned, this webinar will be available for you to view later, so I'm not going to get into the specifics, but here I've just kind of made up some data that I'm going to input into the spreadsheet. So I've got some wastewater data. I know the average influent TKN. I know the flow to the LAS or to the land app system. Let's say it's 150 million gallons, and I know what's being land applied as far as nitrogen concentrations in my nitrate, TKN, ammonia. Also, my example assumes that all the DAF sludge or the DAF skimmings is hauled off site. I know that quantity. Other information I need to know is my ammonia purchases for the year. In my example, I have 6,000 pounds, as well as some stormwater data. And as you'll see in just a moment, you'll need to know some information about your stormwater outfalls as far as the drainage area. So in my example, I have 2 outfalls. As you can see here, I know outfall 1 is 5 acres. It's 80% impervious. Outfall 2, there's the information on it. And then I also happen to have some analytical data for my stormwater runoff, which I have here.
Real quick on the stormwater outfalls, what this spreadsheet's doing is it's going through and looking at the drainage area as well as the runoff factors for stormwater to come up with a flow. And then that flow volume for the various outfalls is then used to calculate your mass loadings of the various constituents required under TRI, ammonia, and nitrate.
So this is just a real simplified mass balance diagram, but as I was stating, so I know, like, let's just say this box represents kind of a biological wastewater treatment system. where I know I've got some influent wastewater coming in, and nitrogen is present in 3 main forms: organic nitrogen, ammonia, nitrate. And as it comes into my wastewater treatment system, some of that organic nitrogen is going to convert to ammonia, which, to use a term from TRI, that organic nitrogen that converts to ammonia represents ammonia that is manufactured. Some of that ammonia converts to nitrates. Again, that ammonia that converts to nitrates represents the nitrates that are manufactured. And then, of course, some of the nitrates are going to be denitrified into nitrogen gas. And then in my example here, you've got wastewater being land applied to the field, so I'm going to have some ammonia, as well as some organic nitrogen, and going to that's in that land applied effluent. So I just kind of threw this in here, just kind of give you a visual. But let's jump back to the tool, and let's just input that data real quick. So here on the Input tab, I'm going to just input the name of my facility, the reporting year. As you can see here, this Input tab is kind of lengthy, as you'll see in a moment. It asks for a lot of information. If something is just not applicable, just please leave that cell blank, as it says here. If a data entry cell is not applicable, leave blank. Do not type NA or other text in this box, as this will cause the tool errors. Because typically this tool is expecting like a numerical value, and if you type in a text, it could cause you problems, or it will cause you problems. So I'm just going to input the data for my example. We had 45 inches of rain, and so I may want to comment here in the comments column, where I got that information. So, you can type anything you want in the comments column, like where the source of your data, or maybe you made an assumption on your data, why you made that assumption. Just something to help, you maybe a year from now, or help the next guy, why did you use the data that you used? So just for example's sake, I'm going to say rainfall from gauge, or you can type whatever. All right, sludge A shipped off type. So this tool is set up assuming that you may have up to 2 sludge residuals, maybe hauled off site. Maybe you have a primary DAF that's hauled to one location, and you've got a secondary DAF sludge that's hauled to a second location. This tool is set up to accommodate up to 2 different sludge haulings of off-site. But in my example, I just have one, and I think the quantity was, say, 10,000 pounds. My sludge A description, let's just call it primary DAF sludge. All right. Now, so I don't have a sludge B. Now, it's not applicable. I could leave that blank, or if you want to clean this up, please don't delete. You don't want to delete rows, which you shouldn't be able to delete anything. It's kind of protected to prevent you from accidentally deleting something. But you can certainly, I could come in here and I could just, hide the row so I don't see it. It just kind of cleans it up. And certainly when you get to the end and you're wanting to print this off for your records, you can certainly hide rows or only print what's applicable to you. So in my example, my wastewater flow, I'm going to assume was 150 million gallons. I'm just going to go through this here pretty quickly. Notice if I discharge to a POTW, I could input the flow there. But in my example, I just discharged to an LAS. It also allows if you discharge to an underground injection system, or if you directly discharge to a stream. But in my example, these quantities are not applicable, so I'm just going to hide them. Just kind of give it. Then it asks for my stormwater drainage basin information. I'm going to give it some data. This spreadsheet, as you can see, is set up if you have for a total of 4 outfalls. I only have 2 in my example, so I would just simply leave these other outfalls, like outfall C and outfall D. I would just leave those blank because they're not applicable. All right, that's kind of just some general facility information. It's probably applicable. It's going to generally be applicable. Now I'm kind of into more of a chemical-specific section. This one in particular for ammonia and nitrate compounds. So for my example, I purchased, it asked how much ammonia was purchased for my refrigeration systems. I'm going to say 6,000 pounds. Then we give you the option of, it asks some questions. Did you increase your ammonia system size? Obviously, if you expanded the plant or you expanded your refrigeration system, it wants to know how many additional pounds of ammonia did you add, because we certainly don't want to count those. Like if you expanded your system and you bought 20,000 pounds of ammonia, but 15,000 pounds went to charge new components, that's what this spreadsheet is asking. It wants to know that. And again, here in italics it says, if so, by how much? Otherwise, leave cell blank. So if you type text in this box, it would cause issues. But I didn't increase the size of my system, so I'm just going to leave that blank. And then there's some questions about, did you have an ammonia leak? When was the ammonia leak controlled with a water spray? Those are typically not going to be applicable, but there's a place there to report if you were to have a one-type release of ammonia. I should say one-time release of ammonia. All right, question, do you have aerobic biological wastewater treatment? In my example, I do. So just like it says here, if yes, type yes in the box. All right, just a few more data input, and I'm going to be finished. So my influent flow to the wastewater treatment system. In my example, I know my influent TKN average is 110 milligrams per liter. I don't have any influent ammonia or nitrate data, so I'm going to leave those blank. And again, if I discharge to a POTW, I would input my data here. But I discharged to, in this example, I discharged to an LAS, so I'm going to input my data here. And I don't discharge to a UIC or a direct discharge. Then I'm going to come on down. In my example, I have analytical stormwater monitoring data. I realize that most facilities probably aren't going to be analyzing or have much nitrate or ammonia data. So if you don't have data, maybe you have some historical data you can rely on, or maybe you can get data from a similar type facility.
Or during the permitting the initial permitting under the industrial stormwater permitting program, there was testing that was done in a number of facilities within the industry, and they gave average ammonia and nitrate and some other parameters like that could potentially be used here, but that data is available through EPA, so there is some data for the industry.
Miriam Putman
has left the meeting.
So there's my stormwater data, and then there's a place to, all right, this section is called parameters. They may not frequently change. So the idea here is that this is some kind of constants, if you will, some values that probably aren't going to change from year to year. So, once you kind of do the work and get a good value, the first time you use this spreadsheet, these type values won't change. So the percent ammonia volatilization from wastewater aeration, we kind of give some recommended values. Obviously, in my SBR from the aeration, there's going to be some, we're going to assume there's going to be some ammonia losses from volatilization. So in my example, I'm going to assume 1% loss, as well as percent ammonia volatilization from wastewater land application. So from just the irrigation
has
itself,
joined the meeting.
I'm going to assume a 10% loss there. If you knew the ammonia concentration in your sludge that's being sent off site, that's where you need to input data here. If you don't have data, maybe ask the sludge hauler. Maybe they've done some testing, maybe not at your facility, but maybe they have some information from a similar type facility. But I'm going to input my data here. And again, I only had a sludge A, which is my primary sludge. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide these because they're not applicable. I'm going to assume that the nitrates in the sludge are 0. All right. So I've given enough information now that the spreadsheet is going to calculate my reporting applicability for ammonia and nitrate compounds. So I'm going to kind as I'm passing by, here's my summary sheet. I can already tell that it looks like I'm definitely going to have to report my nitrate compounds, but it looks like I'm not going to be having to report ammonia. Now, just real quick, if I click on this ammonia calculations tab, this is kind of your backup documentation. Based on the data that you just input, it will calculate your reporting applicability. And as you know, I had a land application system. There's some values it's calculating. I actually released, or I should say, in my example, I actually manufactured 151,000 pounds of ammonia. But, you know, as you know, if you're familiar with TRI reporting, you only count 10% of ammonia in aqueous forms for TRI reporting applicability. So by the time I take 10% of that, I'm actually below the 25,000 pound ammonia reporting threshold. Kind of at the bottom of this calculation page, so here I know how much ammonia was in the DAF sludge sent off site. If you remember, I typed in the term primary DAF sludge, so it shows up here in my primary DAF sludge, 12 pounds, as well as the ammonia present in.
Has left the meeting.
Shows the ammonia in the stormwater discharges in my outfalls. And then at the bottom of this is just some information that you might need for your Form R. Obviously, in this example, you don't have to report ammonia, but if you were to have to report ammonia, you know, this is information you would need to know to complete your Form R. For example, how much ammonia is released to the receiving stream, how much ammonia is released to land treatment, application farming, as well as here's my ammonia released to air. Again, my example, I'm assuming all the ammonia that was purchased to fill the refrigeration system was released as fugitive releases because it was just filling, recharging the system. And then, of course, you have some ammonia losses from the volatilization. So when you guys get the spreadsheet, you can kind of see kind of how it's laid out. One thing I just want to point out, kind of off here in brackets, it's kind of it's telling you how it's calculating or why it's doing what it's doing, or where the calculations are coming from, as well as just some other helpful information to help you complete your Form Rs. Before I pause a moment to take some questions, the nitrate is calculated in a very similar manner. So there's a nitrate calculation tab, and this is the nitrate compound calculations. It's very similar to how ammonia is being calculated as how nitrate's being calculated. So I guess I'll take just a brief break. I don't know, does anyone kind of have any questions so far about what we've covered so far?
Trent, we do not have any questions at the moment.
Okay. Again, we'll take, after we kind of get finished, we'll take questions at the end. So if you've got questions, just hold on to them. And hopefully, if you got questions, just hold on to them, and we'll come back.
Has left the meeting.
All right, so let's just do a real quick example. I know, as far as when it comes to ammonium nitrate, a lot of folks have questions about how do you calculate, you know, the ammonia manufactured or the nitrate manufactured, and this tool will hopefully help you with that and make things a little more clear. I do want to give an example. So kind of moving on, I want to go back to my input worksheet here. Let's just do a quick example of peracetic acid. The peracetic acid calculations are straightforward. Let's do an example real quick. So at my example poultry plant, I use two products with peracetic acid. Say they're called product 10. I used 8,000 gallons, and there's a quantity here. I need to know the quantity that was used, the specific gravity, as well as the percent peracetic acid. So I've got two products, product 10 and a product 20. And so if I know those, if I have that information, I can easily go over to the TRI reporting tool, to my input page, and I'm going to input, name of the peracetic acid product, quantity that I used. There's also, you'll notice here, it says quantity spilled or released to environmental media from accidents or natural disasters. So if you were to have, if you spilt a tote of peracetic acid, there's a place to input that information here on the input page, as well as if you were to have, if you knew that how much peracetic acid, if you had data on how much peracetic acid was volatilizing while it's maybe being stored or handled, you could input a percentage here. But in my example, I'm not going to assume that I have any releases from volatilization.
And with respect to volatilization of peracetic acid, we're seeing more and more folks asking questions about releases into the plant building environment. So if there's monitoring data available, through OSHA testing or stack testing, whatever, you would need to include that to estimate any potential emissions to the air.
So I input the information on my peracetic acid usage. I could come over to my summary page, and it shows that I've otherwise used 19,360 pounds of peracetic acid, which trips the threshold, so I would need to report peracetic acid. And I could go over to the peracetic acid calculation page and just kind of get a little more details on exactly how it arrived at those values. But again, it's this calculation is just straightforward. So this spreadsheet is set up, as we mentioned before, for only certain chemicals. In a similar manner, like if your plant or facility uses methanol, you would input information on methanol. Just one thing I'd like to point out is that if your plant does use methanol, we have a spot here at ASK that says the percent loss from bulk container storage, percent fugitive loss. Now, to calculate the fugitive or the losses from bulk container storage, there's a lot of variables that go into that, as far as how big is the tank, what color is the tank, the weather conditions, where your tank is located at geographically, how many deliveries of methanol did you receive. So there were just too many variables to kind of work into this tool. So if you do use methanol and you store it in a bulk tank, we recommend that you refer to AP 42 Chapter 7.1, and you could determine perhaps a kind of a percentage that you might lose, and you could input that percentage here. But otherwise, methanol is calculated very similarly to the way peracetic acid is calculated, as well as formaldehyde. Again, so maybe, if you just wanted to use just this tool just for, say, a hatchery, because the hatchery uses formaldehyde, you could certainly do that. The only thing that you would need to input was just to go to this formaldehyde section here, input the information on the formaldehyde that you used, and then you would just you would scroll over and look at the formaldehyde, use the formaldehyde calculation tab.
Now, with respect to formaldehyde, a lot of cases, the way the hatcheries are using it or the other facilities are using it, most of it gets volatilized to the air, so your usage could potentially be equivalent to, or your releases could be potentially equivalent to your uses. Now, you might have some other data that indicates otherwise, but, again, use best available information to estimate releases.
Just before we take another break for questions, this is kind of just wrapping up here on the processing plant tool. I just want to encourage, we've noticed a lot of sanitation chemicals contain 2-butoxyethanol, which it's part of a larger family called glycol ethers. And so 2-butoxyethanol is reportable under TRI. So I would just suggest that, again, you check your SDSs, see what your plants are using It's likely they're probably not using enough of it to trip reporting, but again, it would just be good to document that here, the quantities that you're using. Similarly, you would input the information on the chemicals that contain nitric acid. It's likely most folks are using these chemicals in quantities that are below reporting thresholds, but we've seen it seems like over the last several years the uses of sanitation chemicals as well as some other food safety chemicals, the quantities that are in use are just been increasing, and so it's good to revisit and check and see if you're subject to reporting. As well as we have a space here lastly for chlorine, and then I just want to point out here at the bottom of the input tab, we asked the question, other compounds that may require reporting. Just to, again, reiterate that this tool has limitations. It's not for reporting chlorine dioxide or hydrogen sulfide or some other things that may require reporting, and just kind of get you to thinking about that.
And again, it's always a good idea to go through your safety data sheets each year to verify, what chemicals need to be reported, if there's some new ones that have been added to the list of products used at the facility. Also, too, you need to go through calculations each year on, all the chemicals that potentially require reporting, and include information in your files on your calculations determining that reporting was not required or it was. So you need to keep information, on your calculations in the event a regulator comes asking questions.
So we got a couple questions here. One being, if you do not sample stormwater explicitly for nitrogen, say you don't have sampling data for ammonia or for nitrates, do you need to include stormwater calculations in this tool? And
I would say if you've got other facilities where you've got data, or if there's general information available on industry ammonia releases, nitrate releases in stormwater, I would probably include that and report it. I know the EPA will cull through TRI reports from various facilities, and they'll identify that, hey, one facility is reporting this chemical, the other one's not, and potentially raise questions on why they're not. So generally, I would look for data on the more commonly reported chemicals for the various potential release points.
I mean certainly at a kill plant. Now, of course, the ammonia or the nitrates that may be present in the stormwater runoff, compared to what's being manufactured in your wastewater treatment system, is going to be almost insignificant. But still, when it comes to actually completing the Form R, you should, instead of, when it asks, what were your releases to streams? And if you were to check not applicable, that's not accurate, because there's going to be, certainly around a kill plant, if that runoff, there's going to be slight ammonia and perhaps there may be even some nitrates in that stormwater runoff. So, the value may be small. It may be 5 pounds or 10 pounds, but you should account for that in your calculations, and this tool tries to do that.
There's another question that's asking about, whether the tool indicates actual nitrate discharged or theoretical. The tool's going to estimate emissions where data isn't available potentially, or if data is available, then it will run a calculation using actual data. And I hope I answered that question correctly based on... Well,
the tool, if you don't have data for something, and it depends on what it is, but generally you need to input data for the tool to work properly. And maybe you don't have data, then maybe that's where you go look for historical data, or try to look for some guidance, industry guidance, or check one of the EPA reference documents to come up with a numerical value. And again, I think some of these, like back on the additional reporting guidance, it kind of gives some little commonly asked, kind of some hints and tips on how to complete the tool.
Well, and you also need to consider your type of treatment system. In the case of this SBR, sometimes there can be an anoxic stage or settle stage, so you need to take into account, does my treatment system allow potential removal of nitrates? And if it does, then you probably need to consider, the removal performance of nitrates.
Trent, we also had a question from Jamie Hubbard. However, he's not connected via phone call. So Jamie, if you'd like to ask your question, call in through WebEx, or you can type your question at the bottom Q&A bar.
All right. Is there any, before we move on to kind of show you the spreadsheet or the tool for feed mills, is there any other questions?
Trent, there are a couple more that just added to the Q&A box. Could you step through the nitrate calc sheet for us, and how can we access these spreadsheets?
Yeah. All right. So as for those that joined late, as Paul mentioned before, within the next 24 hours, these spreadsheets will be available on the US Poultry and Egg website, and I do want to kind of show. Let me kind of go through how the nitrates are being calculated. So if you remember from my example here, this is the information that I started with. So oftentimes just gathering the data, averaging the data, manipulating the data to get it to, that's going to be the most time-consuming part of your TRI reporting, hopefully. Because once you have the data, inputting it into the spreadsheet will be straightforward and hopefully easy, and it'll be pretty quick. So let me just go through the nitrate calculation page. So in my example, based on my influent flow and the influent TKN concentration, this is how many pounds of TKN I had come into my treatment system. Now, and I guess this is real important. So this tool assumes that if you don't have biological treatment, it basically assumes that you're not going to have really any nitrates manufactured. Basically, it takes that biological wastewater treatment process to get the nitrate formation. Or the majority of your nitrates are going to be manufactured during a biological treatment process, specifically an aerobic biological treatment process. So that's why the spreadsheet asks the questions, do you have aerobic biological wastewater treatment? And that's why this is a really important cell right here to answer. If you don't, leave it blank, but if you do have aerobic biological treatment, you type yes, and that's kind of what sets this calculations here on this nitrate calculation spreadsheet in order. It calculates how many pounds of nitrate are manufactured.
And essentially what this is doing is doing a mass balance around the wastewater treatment system. So it's your TKN going in minus your TKN going out, and then your ammonia is factored into that TKN parameter. And your losses would be either ammonia lost to the air from fugitive releases or nitrate formed, assuming that it's just an aerobic system. Any ammonia that's converted over to nitrate needs to be factored in, and it's going to be calculated with the spreadsheet. And again, it's a mass balance based on nitrogen across that treatment system. So if you look off to the side, it gives the mass balance calculation that's being used. And one important thing with nitrates is that reporting is triggered by nitrate compounds, not as nitrate as N. So the numbers get blown up as a result of that, because you have to ratio the molecular weights to convert it into nitrate compounds, and then for triggering reporting, you actually have to assume that it's sodium nitrate, so that bumps the number up even more. So when you see these really big numbers, it's because of that assumption you have to use nitrate compounds and ratcheting those up.
Right, and I think that confuses a lot of folks. Again, when it comes to your reporting applicability determination, it's the weight of the chemical compound. In this case, it's the weight of the nitrate compound. And, EPA says you're supposed, the TRI guidance says that you assume that nitrate compounds is in the form of sodium nitrate. And, of course, the weight of sodium nitrate in this example is 500,000 pounds, but the actual weight of just the nitrate nitrogen was only 82,000 pounds. But, again, so when it comes to actually the reporting applicability threshold, do I need to report, yes or no, it's the weight of the compound. But when it comes to inputting data on your Form Rs, your actual releases, it's actually just the pounds of the nitrate compound.
And that's not as N, it's of the nitrate, NO3.
Yeah, and that's what, that's what this spreadsheet, here at the bottom of this spreadsheet, it helps you with the completion of that Form R. But again, in my example, I had some nitrates going out to my land app system here. These UIC and drainage to a stormproof ditch, these are not applicable in my example. If you knew that there were nitrates in your DAS sludge that you're sending off-site, a value would show up here. But in my example, I assume the nitrate concentration in the sludge was 0, so I don't have any nitrates in my DAS sludge going off-site. Again, if I wanted to print this neatly, since I only had the one type of sludge being hauled off, I could, I would maybe want to select this and hide it just so it would print easier and be less confusing. So again, in my example, even though I only had, my stormwater sample results only showed that I had like a nitrate concentration of 0.5 milligrams per liter. But now my 0.5 milligrams per liter from my stormwater sample, it actually turns into, based on the rainfall and my drainage area, it becomes 178 pounds of sodium nitrate. So that's why I think you need to look at your nitrate and your ammonia that's in your stormwater runoff, because it can add, on the grand scheme, what's 178 pounds to 500,000 pounds? It's not much, but still, there's probably going to be some in your stormwater runoff, certainly at a kill facility. So here it calculates my nitrates manufactured, and then again some nitrate releases on site. Again, this is kind of information to use to complete your Form R. It tells you, how much was released to a river or a stream, how much was released to land. If I released to a UIC, it would list it here. My nitrates released to the air. Generally you don't have nitrate releases, in the air. You generally assume you don't have those, because it's pretty rare.
I have it. And then your nitrate release to stream is from your stormwater contribution. It's not from your actual wastewater application.
Yeah, also in this cell, as you can see here, my nitrates released, in my example, this 130 pounds is the nitrates that were in the stormwater. Now, obviously, if I also had a direct discharge, where let's say I'm just directly discharging my wastewater, the value, if I had nitrates in my direct discharge, that number would also be added to the stormwater and would show up here in this cell. And again, kind of here at the bottom, the overall nitrate compound treatment efficiency, those that have completed Form Rs before, it asks, what's your treatment efficiency, and this spreadsheet attempts to calculate your treatment efficiency based on this equation or this information here. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and jump now to the feed mill reporting tool.
Trent, this is Paul. While you do that, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
In your input form, you asked the question, do I have aerobic treatment? You typed in yes. If someone were to type in no there, would that give you a faulty value somewhere?
That's correct. You should just leave it blank.
So it's yes or nothing.
Well, no. Actually, no, you can type, I'm sorry. You can type you can type no, or you can type absolutely not, or the spreadsheet is looking for the term yes.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I guess what I mean is, yeah, and that's why I didn't specify. Here in italics it says, if yes, type yes in the box without quotation marks. It doesn't say, so yeah, you can type no or whatever, or leave it blank.
It's important that, we consider, the biological treatment component, because that's where the ammonia can be generated, and then that's where the nitrate can be generated. If you just have a DAF or some pretreatment system, generally you're not going to get that conversion, generation, and or release, of the significant amounts of ammonia and significant amounts of nitrate. It's that biological treatment system that, is where you're generating those other constituents.
Okay.
And I just do want to point out that if you, were just at a plant that just had simple pretreatment, maybe you discharged to a POTW, note here in italics it says, under my influent flow to wastewater treatment system, user must complete this section. For facilities with no biological treatment, the influent data below may equal the effluent data. So what you should do is, if you discharge to a POTW, or let's say you're monitoring something once a month, your effluent data for going to your POTW would essentially equal, you would need to retype those values here in the influent. Let me, for example, let's say if I just had some numbers here, like if I know that's these are my concentrations going to the POTW, I would need to just assume that those are the same concentrations that are coming into my treatment system. And the tool will still work to basically calculate how much is being manufactured, if that makes sense. All right, let's jump to the feed mill. I just want to be brief with this. I know it's real easy when you do TRI reporting for a feed mill just to copy, most everybody's using a Form A for copper, manganese, and zinc or whatever, and it's just real quick to just, Form A is very simple, very quick, and you just, every year you report copper, manganese, and zinc. I think it's important that now's a good time to, determine what exactly is your feed mill using. If you don't work at the mill, I recommend, maybe go over there, walk around the warehouse, look at what products they're using, look at the product labels, look at the SDS sheets, get a good idea of what they're using. And don't just assume, for the last 10 years we've always just used a Form R for copper, manganese, and zinc. The whole point of this tool is to kind of give you the background calculations on, yes, I needed to report copper, manganese, and zinc, but here's why a Form A is justified. So I've got an example feed mill here, and again, for TRI reporting applicability, you use the total compound weight to determine if reporting threshold is exceeded. And what I mean by that is it's not just the copper, but it's the copper compound weight. So if the copper is present as, say, tribasic copper chloride, you would need to look at the weight of that tribasic copper chloride, not just the weight of the copper itself. And I'll give you an example. So, because again, when it comes to reporting applicability determination, it's that you may trip the 25,000 pound, like for a feed mill, it's generally under the processed categories, which is 25,000 pounds. You may trip it based on the weight of the compound, but you may not necessarily trip it on just the weight of the elemental, say elemental copper itself. And I'll give you an example of that here. So let's just say I got a feed mill, and I'm just going to, real quickly, I'm going to say they use 3 ingredients that contain TRI reportable substances, which again, it's important to go back and see everything that they're using that may have a TRI reportable substance. A lot of the SDSs now will actually have a section on TRI reporting applicability, but not everything. So it's important to kind of see what's in there. Again, for the most part, you're looking for anything with manganese, copper, zinc, and possibly selenium. Just like this spreadsheet's got limitations, just like the processing plant spreadsheet. And I just want to mention those real quick. There may be some other things, which is very rare, but there may be some feeds that contain like arsenic or well, I guess there shouldn't be anything that contains arsenic anymore, but maybe that contains cadmium or chromium or cobalt or something like that. But this spreadsheet's not set up to calculate those releases because most mills, by and large, aren't using these other chemicals in quantities that would trip reporting thresholds. So let's say I've got a trace, in my example here, I've got a trace mineral number 1, 600,000 pounds was used. The label states that it contains manganese sulfate, 32%, zinc sulfate, 25%. Now, what this is saying is that it's the weight of the compound, the manganese compound, is 32%. That's important. Now, the manganese component of this particular trace minerals, just the manganese, the elemental manganese itself is going to be less than 32%. But now, because again, the label says manganese sulfate 32%. Whereas contrast that with, say, I've got a product called Zinc 100, and it says on the bag, it says guaranteed analysis of 10% zinc. And what that means is, and maybe it lists zinc sulfate, but it says guaranteed analysis, that generally means that it's 10% pure elemental zinc. So we got to be careful in how we input that on the reporting tool. So if I go to my tool, it's set up very similarly to the plant. There's a cover sheet. There's an instruction page. Recommend that you read carefully. There's also an example data input page. This is kind of giving you an example because certainly if you weren't part of this webinar or, it's kind of a way for a guy or for someone to log in and kind of get an idea of how this spreadsheet's working. But I'm not going to go over the example data input. I'm just going to actually do a real example. So let's say I've got a feed mill, reporting year. All right, it asks up here at the top under some general data, does your pellet coolers have cyclones? Let's say yes. Are your pellet cooler cyclones high efficiency cyclones? I'm going to say yes. And again, typically if you're, what's the difference, what's a high efficiency cyclone? It's generally defined as if the length of the cyclone is 3 times the cyclone diameter. And the vast majority of cyclones in the industry are high efficiency, but don't just assume. You should confirm that yourself. So let me just real quickly kind of input some information here for my example. Now, if you notice, if I were to jump back to the other screen, I said it was 32% manganese sulfate. So there's 2 options here. I need to do one or the other. Now I can give the percent, the chemical compound, so the percent chemical compound would be, say, the manganese sulfate or the manganese oxide or the copper, the tribasic copper chloride. It would be the whole compound. Or alternatively, I could just list the percent of the elemental chemical. So meaning like just the percent manganese or just the percent copper or just the percent zinc. But in this particular one, the way it was listed on the label, it said it was 32% manganese sulfate, it was 5% manganese oxide, 25% zinc sulfate. So just bear with me just for a moment as I just kind of want to show you how this spreadsheet's going to show us what it's doing here. So again, off to the right, say for manganese sulfate, the total weight for the year of the total manganese sulfate compound was 192,000 pounds. with the actual, just the weight of the manganese was 69,000 pounds. Let me quickly list my other product. Let's say I had the product called Zinc 100, and it said it was guaranteed analysis of 10% zinc, but it also said that zinc was in the form of zinc sulfate. So I would need to list over here. Here it would be under the percent elemental chemical. It would be 10% zinc. And then just one just for copper, just so I've got a copper example. Let's say I've got a tribasic copper chloride, and the product label for it says its guaranteed analysis is 50% copper. So again, I know that tribasic copper chloride here, I would come across percent elemental chemical, it would be 50% copper. So as you can see in this example, the actual copper component is 25,000 pounds, but the tribasic copper chloride compound as a whole was 42,000 pounds. And then this spreadsheet set up to accommodate up to 8 different ingredients that contain TRI reportable compounds, but I'm just going to stick with the 3. Then after you input your information, you can go over to the summary tab, and here it's telling me that I indeed need to report copper, manganese, and zinc. It's reportable, and that a Form A is acceptable. And if I scroll down, based on this tool assumes that there are going to be slight releases of these trace metals from your pellet coolers as well as at your feed loadout area. Now, some mills may be different. You know, some mills may have baghouse control on the feed loadout area, but there may be some, some more rare instances where this isn't, exactly true. But I think for the typical feed mill, this will suffice. And in fact, here I actually had, over the years' time here, my releases to the atmosphere, total releases was 1.9 pounds of copper and 7.1 pounds of manganese. So forth. Anyway, this calculation just helps reaffirm that since my releases were below 500 pounds, I can in fact use a Form A. So again, I think if you've got the data, certainly mills, they know exactly what they're using. You can find out what's in them. Go ahead and get the data, input it into the tool, and use this. Go ahead and have that backup documentation on why you're reporting copper, manganese, and zinc and using a Form A to do that.
And again, check each year because the formulation of these chemicals can change from year to year.
Yeah, and they will, especially your trace mineral mix. Those change typically every year and a half, as feed formulations are always changing. So just because you assumed it was 20% of X one year, double check, it's likely that they may have changed the feed formulation on you slightly. So that's essentially the two spreadsheets. There's a couple other things I just want to mention before I open it back up for questions. Certain cells are kind of protected from editing, but if, let's go back to the reporting tool for the processing plant for a moment. And let's say I input all the data and I determine that I need to report for ammonia, nitrate compounds, and peracetic acid. So all these other things like methanol, glycol ethers, they're not applicable, let's say. You could simply just select, the tabs that you wanted to print. Let's say I wanted to print the cover sheet, the input tab, the summary tab, the ammonia calcs, nitrate. You could simply select which tabs you wanted and just, print what you wanted for your record. So there's the option of doing that.
And even if you aren't required to report, you still need to print out records showing that you're not required to report and keep it in your file because, questions will arise if a regulator comes out and does an inspection. They'll ask for you to provide proof why you didn't report a certain chemical.
Yeah, we've noticed that it seems like EPA, just kind of just off topic for a moment, that EPA seems to be trying to internally do some data integrity checks. Maybe they're noticing that you're subject to RMP, but you've never reported ammonia on, let's say you're subject to RMP because of your ammonia refrigeration system, but maybe they notice, well, hey, this facility is subject to RMP, but they've never reported ammonia on a TRI. It's good to have that backup calculation to say, well, here's why I'm not reporting ammonia for TRI, because we're noticing that EPA is starting to ask that. Or another example is, let's say you filled out an application for let's say an NPDES permit, and you said that, well, you took a wastewater sample, you sampled it for lead, or let's say mercury, and there was a slight hit in your mercury sample, and maybe it equated to half of a pound. But, the EPA is kind of asking, well, why didn't you report mercury on your TRI reform? So, anyway, just anything that EPA has access to, they're kind of doing some data checks and just want to make you aware. In fact, one of the changes to the TRIME web for reporting year 2016 is they actually allow you to log in and basically, even if you're not subject to reporting, you can still log in and basically give it some data and say, I'm not subject to reporting, because they're starting to ask, or I guess they could certainly ask you, hey, why didn't you report? So it's important to have these backup documentations to prove why you did or did not report.
And again, particularly on the lead and mercury, whether it be a city or whether it be a state, they might require you to do priority pollutant or some other testing, once a year for a lead or mercury, which is a PBT, and the reporting thresholds are very low for those. And we're seeing a lot of cross-communication between MPDS permitting program versus a non-discharge permitting program and TRI. So EPA is catching these inconsistencies where you might have reported under one program and not under another, and that kind of brings us back around to the question on stormwater monitoring, that you might have reported ammonia in a stormwater report submitted to a state and didn't necessarily report it under TRI as far as releases to surface water. So it's very important right now that you make sure there's consistency of reporting across the various programs, whether that be your air permits, your non-discharge permits, your MPDS permits, and then again TRI.
And one last thing I want to mention before we look at questions is, I think obviously there may be some. We're looking forward to kind of getting some feedback on this tool, on this spreadsheet. We imagine that most folks are probably going to, May and June are going to be using the spreadsheet a lot when it comes, near the July 1 reporting deadline. So you may find some, typos or have some questions or maybe have some suggestions on how it can be improved. And so after this reporting cycle, certainly if it's, kind of minor things we can adjust, we look at kind of releasing a improved or a second release, so to speak, of this version of the spreadsheet after this year's reporting deadline. So, maybe in the fall of this year, or we do plan on hopefully updating the tool after we get your feedback. And so, yes, as you guys, get the tool and use it, we welcome your feedback. Of course, Stephen and I can be reached. There's our contact information, as well as you can contact, US Poultry and Egg.
I was going to give a real quick update, too. The hydrogen sulfide reporting tool is being updated. We've gotten review and feedback from Dr. Speece at University of Vanderbilt. He's kind of the guru on anaerobic treatment in this country. He reviewed it. Overall, generally agrees with the method. He did want some wording changes, maybe some additional details on why certain things have been assumed. So it's mainly, there's not significant changes in it, but there will be an update issued in the next couple weeks, again, based on comments from Dr. Spees. I also gave a presentation on hydrogen sulfide TRI reporting, and EPA was at that meeting, and they took copies of both the presentation and the H2S reporting tool and got back to us with a couple questions, comments, nothing of significance. So anyways, that's in the works and it will be updated.
And again,
available.
Yeah, and that's for the hydrogen sulfide guidance document that U.S. Poultry has available.
Yeah, I want to say again on peracetic acid that there is some monitoring that's going on at facilities of what the levels of peracetic acid in the air, and you need to keep in mind that potentially that data might need to be included or considered in TRI reporting. As far as PAA, there was a question on neutralization with sodium metabisulfite or something like that. Generally, the calculation assumes that all the PAA is being neutralized in the pre-treatment system. So whether you're using sodium metabisulfite or the biological process itself is, causing treatment of that, that's the assumption that's being made in the spreadsheet. Now, if you've got data indicating that there might be some PAA in the discharge, I think you probably need to take that into consideration. I do need to warn that some of those colorimetric testing kits for PAA are pretty unreliable and may not give you a good number.
So if you've got a question, if you want to ask it, please raise your hand. Anybody have any questions or further discussion?
We don't have any questions, Trent. We have one from Christy Smith. Christy, you may go ahead with your question.
Yes, do you have any guidance on accounting for residual peracetic acid that could be contained in plastic totes that are sent off-site for recycling?
I haven't seen any. I guess, does someone have some data that they're saying it is in there, or someone asking whether there is any residual in that tote?
Well, I was reading through some guidance from EPA for chemical companies, and there was some information contained in there about that the assumption was that there would be some amount of residual, even though the container would be considered wreck or empty, that there would be some residual in there that would need to be accounted for.
Have they given any guidance on that?
Well, it included the guidance document included a table, but it did not. It didn't reference plastic totes. It talked about different kind of containers, but not plastic totes. So I was just wondering if you guys had come across that.
No, we hadn't seen anything in that regard. It might need to be considered, though, in TRI. I guess my first question would be, where's it going, who's taking it, whether those totes potentially have been cleaned.
Has left the meeting.
I think that's a good question. If there is some going out in there, I think it needs to be taken into account, particularly if EPA or some other regulatory agency has issued guidance on it.
Any other questions? Okay, this is Paul Breadwald. Stephen and Trent, thank you. We appreciate the work you did on the tool, and we appreciate your time today going over the tutorial. We already did get one suggestion from Dave Townsend. It's a good suggestion. Potentially, simply take the question there regarding the aerobic treatment and just have a drop down, so a yes or no drop down tag, I believe. So There's one question. We do have some more questions here, I believe. Hold on. There's a question from Joe Peace. It says, could you please add the section on the summary sheet where the totals go in the software sections 5.6.1.8.1, etc.
Tina Williams.
Has left the meeting.
This is the new TRI filing, folks. Does that make, do you care to answer that one, Trent or Stephen?
Can you ask that again? We're not seeing that one.
It says, could you please add the section on the summary sheet where the totals go in the software sections? Joe, are you called into the call? No. Okay. Well, Joe, we'll try to get your answer or suggestion added to the toolkit. If you want to maybe email me or call me later, I'll be happy to try to get some clarification on that and get that worked into it. And then Jim Britton asked, how do I get the tool? And that was a question we had.
Has joined the meeting.
We had earlier. We have all your emails, so our intention is once we get the final modifications done here in the next 24 hours, we will send through email a link to everyone that participated on the WebEx today that will take you to the page on the U.S. Poultry website where you can download the tool.
And again, you know, when you're using this tool, you need to take in consideration the site-specific conditions, that if you've got additional data that might not be adequately accounted for in this tool, or you've got other treatment processes, or you got other release points, you need to take that into consideration on when you're filling out your TRI and whether this tool, you know, adequately accounts for those other scenarios or other site-specific conditions.
The only other thing that I would add to that is, I mean, clearly most of you all are probably savvy enough to get in here and unlock some of these fields. I would suggest, if you have any intention of doing that, to save a master copy somewhere that you could get back to in case of getting your spreadsheet to a point that's been adulterated and you question whether or not you're getting the correct answer. So I'd certainly save a master copy somewhere that is the original copy sent out by U.S. Poultry and the one that was developed by Woodruff and Howe. Any other questions?
Jeff Carroll.
Has left the meeting.
Okay, seeing none, I appreciate y'all's your participation today, and we hope that this helps you out. And please feel free to email us. Let us know how you think
Has
this went.
left the meeting.
And we hope that this tool helps you out in the future.
Jeremy.
Has left the meeting.